Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight here at Green Apple Books on the Park, celebrating Sloane Crosley's cult classic. Let's give it up for Sloane. Very pleased to welcome Sloane Crosley back to Green Apple and back to San Francisco. Thank you for choosing us, deciding to come back here. Always appreciate having you. I'm Car, I'm the events coordinator here for Green Apple Books, and I am here to tell you a bit of business before we get to the really fun stuff for the evening. We have actually several great upcoming events, so I would encourage you to check out our full event calendar on our website. If you're into events such as the one you are attending right now, you might be into some other ones that we have scheduled out. I was telling someone earlier that I'm a little biased, but we do have a pretty good calendar ahead of us for the season, so please do check it out. All of our events are free unless stated otherwise, and that being said, if you are able, please do buy books. Please do buy books from us if you are able to. If you've been here before, you've definitely heard me say that when you buy books from us, you not only support us as an independent bookstore, but you also support the authors who put so much work into making these books. And then you get to have a book, which is pretty cool. So if you are able, please do purchase. I can think of one book that you might want to buy this evening, but we have others as well. So thanks so much. Thank you also for keeping your masks on between sips of your beverage. We're just trying to move forward as best as we can during this COVID time that just keeps happening. So thank you for being cool about it. We appreciate it. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the author that's joining us this evening. Sloane Crosley is the author of the novel The Clasp and 3 essay collections, including Look Alive Out There and the New York Times bestsellers I Was Told There'd Be Cake and How Did You Get This Number? A frequent contributor to the New York Times, she lives in Manhattan, and her novel Cult Classic is the reason we're here tonight. So please join me in welcoming Sloane Crosley.
Thank you. Hello. Well, thank you all for coming. I very much appreciate it. I think I'm going to start out by reading, and yes, you can buy any book in here. I was just sort of, as she was saying, you could potentially buy a cult classic. I was looking over my shoulder at a translation of Goodnight Moon, which is hard to compete with. So you can also buy this if you prefer. Hello. I'm going to read for a little bit from the new book. It just came out a couple weeks ago, so you're under no contractual obligation to have read it yet. It will not be a quiz. But I think all you need to know, because I'm going to skip the prologue, is that the sort of gist of these people in this book is that it's a group of people. They live in New York. And they all used to work for a magazine called Modern Psychology, which has since folded. It is the least creative part of the book, probably. It's pretty clearly based on Psychology Today, which is not folded, so good for Psychology Today. But they have these sort of work reunion dinners, and there's a guy who used to run the magazine named Clive Glenn. And everybody else is sort of floundering in their careers, whereas Clive, post the magazine folding, has morphed into this sort of full-blown psych guru person who eventually, as we get further in the book, don't worry, I won't read till this far. It turns out he's running a mind control cult out of an abandoned synagogue on the Lower East Side, as one does. And the way I sort of describe it, sort of based on a very real place that I pass quite frequently in New York, where there's graffiti all over the bottom and pigeon shit on top, as if like the two species have come to an arrangement about like who's going to take what. But meanwhile, it's this sort of like wellness cult, and the point of it is to essentially artificially get people over their past relationships as fast as possible through artificial means using technology and meditation. And our heroine, Lola, is their guinea pig. So she runs into a series of ex-boyfriends over the course of the novel, which is not that remarkable. There's a lot of stuff that people always say is like only in New York. I'm like, people run into people in Kansas City. It happens all the time. I think that's all you really need to know. That's even jumping ahead a little bit, but it opens up at the dinner, the first reunion dinner before she runs into her first ex-boyfriend, which she assumes is coincidence. Our dinner was winding down in Chinatown when I got up to get cigarettes. This was more about giving myself something to do than satisfying a craving, unless you count the desire to take a break from other people as a craving. I don't smoke, not officially. A significant portion of my friends would express surprise to see me smoking at all. I also never smoked the whole thing, opting to leave a trail of crushed paper flutes in my wake. I sometimes wonder how this aborted indulgence reads to the naked eye, aside from registering as litter. I fantasize about other people's fantasies, about cars that arrive earlier than expected, sweeping me off to some glamorous event. Sometimes I go darker. I think of kidnappings, of vans, of men in ski masks tossing me behind a steel partition. The traces of saliva on the filter, this is how the identifications will be made. Alas, the unlikelihood of being yanked off the street in downtown Manhattan kind of declaws the idea, but it beats vaping. What kind? Asked Vadi, tearing herself away from Zach a little too easily. Her face was flush. She put an elbow on the table, triggering a little earthquake in her wine glass. Gold bangles slid down her arm, chasing after each other until they became one. Zach reached for his phone in an attempt to claim his own distractions. The ones with the nicotine in them, I said. Oh, she said, somehow disappointed. What kind? What a meaningless question. Cigarettes are not seasonal, and Vadi didn't smoke. Though she'd always been brimming with meaningless questions, asking what time meetings to which she wasn't invited began, if I knew a long dead psychiatrist's contact information, if B.F. Skinner had any pets, if we had an angle on this emotional intelligence feature, if I had any double-sided tape. Who in the history of the world has ever had any double-sided tape? Then she'd sigh over my desk after I told her I couldn't help her, drumming those aristocratic fingers on my monitor, as if her standing there would somehow produce a better answer. The longer she stood, the more insulting her presence became. This was Vadi's way of suggesting she knew other people's minds better than they did. I once read this article in Harper's, said Zach, eyes still fixed on his screen, about people who did all sorts of crazy shit on Ambien. They woke up in the corner of the room or boiled their underwear. This one woman, she buttered her cigarettes and ate them. Harper's published this? I asked. Somewhere, he said. Cautionary tale. That's not a story about cigarettes, Vadi corrected him, combing her hands through her hair. It's a story about Ambien. Or butter, I offered. It's a story about the confluence of desire, he said. Don't say desire, she scolded him. An orgy of vices, then. Really, she looked at him hard. Don't say orgy. The woman probably crushed up the pills and rolled the cigarettes in them, Zach muttered. What? Vadi hissed. You know, like Mexican corn. No one knows what you're talking about. Lola knows, he said. You guys can leave me out of this if you want. How did these people wind up being my people? I'd had other friends before them, had I not? It was hard to remember. After modern psychology folded, it was as if a starting pistol had been fired and we scattered to separate corners of the professional universe. Vadi went to a betting and lifestyle company run by a socialite. The arbitrary delineation between betting and lifestyle amused us all. She ran their events and produced their content, blog posts with headlines like "Thread count on me" and "Bath bombs to detonate calm." Her work complaints centered around her flighty, impetuous, presumptive boss, traits I associated with Vadi herself. It was therefore difficult to tell if the socialite was a real problem or if Vadi was just unaccustomed to engaging her mirror. Zach wound up overseeing the editorial page of a headhunting agency. The idea was that if Modern Psychology, the world's preeminent psychology periodical, had seen fit to employ Zach, he must be a people person. He must have insight into the needs of people. When they fired him, they cited a personality conflict. The fact that it took them 6 months to come to this conclusion was alarming. Generally speaking, being fired would have been a badge of honor for Zach. Alas, to be an unemployed headhunter was to be the butt of a joke even he did not find funny. Disillusioned with corporate America and the hoi polloi corruption of media, he went the practical route rather than settle for some facsimile of culture. He entered the gig economy, delivering medical supplies, building bookshelves, drilling holes in the walls of useless liberal arts graduates, picking up dog medication for old ladies. He would have preferred to report to the dogs. Of Clive's proteges, only I stayed the course, or the closest to the course. I wound up running an arts and culture vertical of a site called Radio New York, the pet project of a venture capitalist who mostly left us alone. I farmed out bite-sized nostalgia in the mode of lists of popular books and movies and podcasts, or assigned essays on popular books or movies or podcasts, or think pieces responding to widely circulated essays on popular books or movies or podcasts. The Lloyd Dobler nightmare for the new millennium. Radio New York stifled every voice and clipped every word count. The culture of quotas and reviews was difficult for some, me, but a given for others, anyone under the age of 35. But at least the specter of media decay felt different than it had at Modern Psychology, where the end of the magazine felt greater than itself. In the new media landscape, reduction was baked into the deal, like going to work as a stunt double. Probably nothing bad will happen to you immediately, but probably something bad will happen to you eventually. Is there any of that spicy cauliflower thing left? Asked Vadi, looking down the length of the table. The table had been demonstrably cleared, all dishes replaced by dessert menus. I worry about you sometimes, said Zach. Worry about yourself, she said, patting him on the cheek. He jerked his head back in a half-hearted way that suggested that cheek would go unwashed. I touched my jacket on the back of my chair. It was a thin army jacket, flammable, more for style than utility, and I told myself I would leave it as self-imposed collateral. In the beginning, these dinners were a lifeline to the past. The brainchild of Clive Glenn, our erstwhile king, they came with the air of leadership, no matter how neutered, which is what we wanted and what we had lost. There was a time when we'd spent every moment with one another, arguing over articles, like arguing productively with your coworkers. We were shipwrecked from the newsstands, kept alive by doctors' offices that allowed us to claim a staggering 17.5 pairs of eyes per copy. We were not invited to the cool parties, except sometimes Vadi, or the all-day Twitter wars, except often Zach, or the televised panels, except toward the end, Clive. But we had low health insurance deductibles and we could stand the sight of one another. Alas, even we were not spared from the shifting American attention span. Advertisers had clued in to the futility of the magazine ad, even at a targeted publication like ours. Print ads are like tossing wet pasta down a well, said the rep for one account, a mixed metaphor that kept us amused. It puts the pasta down the well or else it gets the hose again. As we switched from monthly to bi-monthly, from bi-monthly to quarterly, from quarterly to online, and from online to dust. Only Clive was somehow bolstered by this entire experience, not unscathed like me, not placed with some media host family until he found his forever home, bolstered. Even when his name still crowned the masthead, he'd begun to step away from the drier aspects of running a magazine and morphing into a full-blown psych guru. He wrote the introduction to an anthology about psychic pain. He invented a DSM drinking game that he played at intimate dinner parties with celebrities who posted the videos. When the videos leaked, he issued an apology for his insensitivity that landed him on NPR. He got his own talk show for a while, which was something. Tote bags appeared with the silhouette of his face on them. His speaking fees skyrocketed. But even Clive, with his brain-wise meditation kits and his fancy friends, even Clive, well, I just never got the sense that any of us were as happy apart as we'd been together, which is why, counterintuitive as it sounds, I dreaded these dinners. We were flaunting our former selves to our current ones. We'd become too disconnected, too leery of bridging the gap, too likely to run down a list of conversational categories as if detailing a car. How's the family, the job, the apartment hunt? As if making deeper inquiries would open up a sinkhole of sadness from which we'd never escape. Once at an Indian restaurant, I watched Zach sullenly picking cubes of cheese out of his saag paneer. I don't know why he ordered it. He was in a self-flagellating relationship with dairy. I asked him if he had any fun summer plans. Lola, he said, twisting his face. Are you making conversation with me? We hated asking these questions. Besides, I knew all the answers already. For instance, I knew all about Clive's apartment hunt. He'd gutted a place in my ever gentrifying neighborhood, a duplex penthouse with heated bathroom floors and 2 terraces, one of which got caught in the fold of the design magazine spread about the renovations. The building was a complex for childless men who divorced early and without consequence, men who would still be young at 50. Clive had a live-in girlfriend now, a giraffe of a person named Chantal, with thighs so thin birds probably flew right into them. But she was still a poster child for New York. He was still a poster child for New York divorcees, for inoffensive fine art and impressing women half his age by boiling linguine. Sometimes I'd see him on the subway platform and hide. I was not proud of this, but I was never in the right frame of mind to deal with Clive. And yet the temptation was always there to grab a stranger, point and whisper, ask me anything about that man over there. Thank you. Thank you before you started clapping, which is just real obnoxious. So yeah, after that, as promised, she excuses herself and runs into the first ex-boyfriend, which doesn't seem so weird until it keeps on happening. And then it turns out there's something afoot that is a little more bizarre than a comedy of manners among, media people in New York. But if you guys have any questions, comments, criticisms, I will stand here for a real awkward amount of time. I don't feel weird about it. Hi, thank you. Lovely person.
I'm sure you came up with the idea for this novel for of course many months or years or whatever, but was there a particular event or something where you were like, I think I have something here. I have this idea about being with different boyfriends. Is there a moment that you actually, this is what I'm gonna write about?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so the question is, did I have a sort of moment? I don't know if I should repeat it into this microphone. I should. I'm getting a thumbs up. Okay. The question.
Very long-winded.
No, it'd be amazing if I just verbatim. I'm sure you thought of this a long time ago over the course of different periods of time. But basically, what was sort of the impetus for writing the book? What was the inspiration, or was there a moment? Yeah, I mean, you ever see the fountains at the Bellagio? No, I'm kidding. No, it doesn't. It's funny because for narrative nonfiction, for essays, they do tend, maybe because they're shorter, it might just be the nature of the beast. They do tend to work like that, where there's a story or some theme, and I just am missing the other half. So I have the theme, I have the thing I'm thinking about, and missing the structure. I have the structure, but in order to give it a little more depth or pathos or even humor, actually, than a cocktail party story, I'm like, what does this mean? With this, I guess it's sort of a grand old version of that. So I started writing it in 2017 and finished it, handed in the first draft in March of 2020. So that was interesting because we were like, oh, will there be ink and paper, or will the zombies eat all of it? It's a very unsure time. But so in between, there are bits that I've been noodling with for ages, but I would say the biggest, it's so hokey to really answer this honestly, but the biggest bit is just writing about romance and love and relationships, and also setting it in an area obviously I know very well because I live there, because it seemed like a really cliche thing to do. And I think I was avoiding it for a really long time, not only for how I get pigeonholed as a writer. So, just like basic, human being worried about outside perception when you shouldn't kind of thing. But also because these topics are massive, romance, the Civil War, just things that are very heavily tackled. I'm like looking around, we're in the children's book section. I'm like, I don't even know. You just do a new one of these. It's amazing. But I thought, okay, I need something, a sort of interesting container. So in that way, it has that same sort of essayistic impulse. This is a long answer to your question, but it is the answer. And so that's when I thought, I just want to do something that is almost like a wish fulfillment. My first novel has this a little bit too, where, you know, you have these people that are just sort of sitting around talking in circles, and I just wanted to give them a way to pop out of their lives. And so there's a bunch of these, not a bunch, but like 4 or 5 of these old shuls, old synagogues on the Lower East Side. And some of them have been refurbished. Some of them are owned by, like, you know, some artist who bought them got the thing in like 1970. And I thought this building, you know, there's a bit in the beginning of the book where when she's first introduced by Vadi, who, you know, I read about a little bit, her sort of best friend, when she's first introduced to this organization, as the doors shut behind her, she looks across the street and she can see, you know, this like sliver of light, and people across the street, like sort of like craning their necks to see where she's going, with that very specific New York jealousy of like, I'm not allowed in there. What's in there? And I felt that very strongly myself in real life. And so the second I sort of realized that I could have not magical realism, because that's a loaded term, and not, but like sort of speculative fiction about romance, I did it. And then the other thing is as I started writing it, and this isn't like the impetus for it, but as I started writing it, I realized that all these stories where there's some sort of mystical intervention, specifically in someone's personal life, whether it's their family or their love life, they're all for men. So you start with Dickens, and then you have like It's a Wonderful Life, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. You know, there's a lot of cinematic comps, and they're all, it's like dudes who need to learn how to love or something. I don't know what they need, but women are terrible. So this is, I mean, I love them, but this is, so she needs to learn sort of how to get her shit together. I can curse on this, right? Oh, I should have read a lot more in that case. But yeah, that's a long way of saying it. But I guess those are the reasons why, like the engines. Yeah. Welcome. Thank you for asking the question. Brave soul.
I don't know about your earlier work, your essays, and I always thought that, like, you know, truth is straight to fiction. And I was kind of wondering whether or not some stories that, you know, your essays, those inspire you to kind of, is your latest book, does it take anything from some of these past experiences that might have been documented in your earlier work?
That is a good question. I sound like a politician. I'm so happy you asked that. Like filibustering until I can figure out the answer. Okay, but just to repeat it, because that's what we're doing, I guess. It's about basically my the idea that truth is stranger than fiction, and have I mined previous experiences, but not previous experiences. You mean previous essays for this, or you just mean you do mean previous essays?
Yeah, some of the stories in your earlier work,
right?
You know, I thought it was fantastic and kind of like,
oh, thank
you. This is a great story.
Oh, right.
Those inspire you to kind of say, this into like a novel.
Okay, have I ever been inspired to take those stories and put them into a novel? So no, is the short answer. But I understand what you mean, and I actually also take it as a great compliment, because I do want there to be a sort of storytelling aspect, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. There's a great author. Do you guys know who Jim Crace is? Does anyone know who Jim Crace is? Someone, there's some nods. The misfortune of retiring the same day Philip Roth retired, so no one, yeah, whatever, it's okay. But he's a great author, British author, and I remember hearing him speak once, and he's like, you know, I'm just quoting him basically, but he said that, you know, people write for political reasons, you know, to get something out, to make a statement, to sort of make some sort of pain come to the surface, that kind of thing. And he's like, I write to entertain. And he's like, and I think you should never forget that as a writer, you're a volunteer. And it just really stuck with me, and has kept me from writing, you know, 12-page descriptions of an oak tree that are completely unsolicited, you know, just because, like, you know, you want to take your time. Obviously, you want to make the prose as beautiful as you possibly can, but also like, let's wrap it up, you know. So much like this question. So I guess what I would say is that I do try to make the essays entertaining and not just having sort of a point, and not just me. Ooh, I'm sorry. not just me feeling the need to answer something, some sort of venting, but they don't feel transferable to fiction somehow. The stories don't. The details often do. So it's sort of a macro micro thing. Like the details often do. Like there's only so many ways. I just smacked this microphone, and there's only so many ways in either nonfiction or fiction to say I smacked the microphone. They're going to look the same. So there is some sort of like, if there's like a humor in the essays that transfers over to the novel, it's sort of disingenuous for me to be like, what? It's not me at all. Like, but it's also, it just serves, the stories and the details serve just a totally different purpose. The former being to make a point, and the latter really being to tell a story. And ideally those have a Venn diagram. But really this one is like, if a joke or a story or an anecdote doesn't serve the plot of these people I made up, away it goes. So yeah, you're welcome. Somewhat coherent. Hi. You guys are amazing. Everybody. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. No, they all, it's fine.
Okay, they're all cliche, got it.
No, not they're all cliche. Unless I'm like Leo. I'm a Leo. Okay, go ahead.
I was just curious, do you tend to have like types of characters or categories of characters that you like, particularly love or particularly hate?
Ooh. Wait, in my own fiction? Okay, so the question was, do I tend to have types of characters that I particularly love or that I particularly hate? I'm happy you narrowed it down, even though it would be better to sort of get it off of me and criticize other people. It's too broad if I do that. And I'm like, all the characters I love. We'll be here till 5 in the morning. In this specific novel, I really like the slight villain. I mean, the truth is that, you know, Lola, who's at the center of this novel, and I did an interview recently with a friend where we were talking about it, and I was like, I think she's kind of a hollow character in a way, which isn't very selling for the novel. Please buy the book. But she's supposed to be sort of an every woman, and then you watch this flow both of friends and of ex-boyfriends, but it's friends just as much. Not to be like it's a book about the friends we made along the way, but you know, a lot has been made of the book being about ex-boyfriends, and it's also, as you can tell from the passage I read, not just about that. And it sort of allows everyone else to shine around her. And I think that the more sort of villainous ones I like. So in The Clasp, I like Nathaniel, who was this sort of jerky writer who left New York to go to LA to try to make it, and it was just sort of social climbing and things weren't going very well for him. And he was at some point goes to a doctor and is diagnosed, like he's having heart palpitations, and the doctor diagnoses him with like a slightly small heart. So that was fun to just let that lie there. I'm like, that's actually a real thing that can happen. But anyway, long story short is Clive is the character I miss the most. And this is really the first time that's happened, you know, maybe because it's my second novel, maybe it's taken a while for it to be like, I miss some of the characters. I don't know if I miss the characters in The Clasp. And it's not that they're shit and I don't like that book. It's more just that I think I was still had a little bit of training wheels on in terms of my attachment for fiction and nonfiction. And this one, I just sort of properly lost myself in my mind and these people. And Clive's, there's something about him where he's so like ebullient and evil. And the sort of jokey, like, you know, don't worry about it, everything will be fine kind of manner he has while he's actually doing something that's ethically incredibly questionable, because it's not really an even playing field. Because what I might not have mentioned is that, you know, Lola knows at a certain point that this experiment, which I won't say too much about it, but is going to start. But I keep hitting this poor mic. But the other people in the experiment don't know. So, you know, there's a lot of questions about morality, about sort of free will in the book as well. Anyway, but Clive I miss. Hi.
First draft in March 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that must have been very strange. Did it change? Like, was there another draft that changed things?
Okay, so the question is, I finished my first draft in March 2020, which must have been, I'm just gonna just sort of free will here, trippy. And you're like, I didn't say that. But did it sort of, as I was like folding back, as I was going back through it, had it changed because things were changing in the world? Or I had changed. I mean, that happens naturally with every draft you do. Ideally, the best thing you can give yourself is time in between to forget you wrote it, so you can approach something with a more critical eye. Like when people ask for writing advice, I'm always like, finish your shit, number one, and walk away very slowly. No one gets hurt. So that was going to be true, COVID or no COVID. That I then went in. You just refine it. But in terms of COVID, no, I think, it's funny. I really felt strongly, without being too sort of gross about it, that because it was a real like last one out, turn out the lights novel. You know what I mean? Like I was like, okay, this is like, I'm handing this in as we hear that stores are shutting in Spain and France, and that something is going on with hand sanitizer. That's like the day I handed this in, something is just sort of creeping and descending upon everything in a Joycean fashion. And I thought, well, do I go back and like, I asked my editor, I was like, I don't put masks on people, do I? Like they did with the lions outside the library, like just big stupid masks that they didn't put on the Statue of Liberty because she was already socially distant. I'll be here all night. Sorry, really free reign with the microphone. Yeah, so it didn't lead to any, like, it's not like it's a darker book now, and it's not a more nostalgic for a New York book. In fact, part of the reason is because while I was editing this book, I'm also working on a book of nonfiction that is a humor-ish book, but about grief, and it has a lot of death in it. And that's what I decided to work on during my pandemic. It's like, how'd you spend your summer vacation? I faced a wall and wrote about death. So this was really fun to edit for sane making purposes while that was happening. So anything that was like a shift in mood of the world is changing really was applied to that book. Having said that, like, I feel like it's still a perfectly, New York is so, I don't know if it ever left, but back in some ways that I feel like now it doesn't even, people aren't even flinching. But it's funny, like, a year ago where I'm like, this is a novel where tons of people, the entire premise is based on bunches of people running into each other in public enclosed spaces. And coughing on each other. Now that'd be actually a really dark thing to do. It's just like if I went back to the draft and like the last line is like the last, there is a piece of dialogue that's the last line, and instead I have the character just be like, it's very dark. I'm sorry, but I don't know. You're allowed to make these jokes when you were in New York for COVID. But yeah, it didn't. It's weirdly, it did affect me, but it didn't affect this book. In fact, I feel like I owe a lot to this book in terms of saving my mood during that time, which hopefully comes through. Yeah. I want to make you all ask a question. It's very exciting.
I think you kind of answered it, but I was going to ask.
Did I not answer your question?
No.
Oh God, I was like, after all that.
I was going to ask, like, how much is New York City a character in the book? And I was going to say that I'll find out when I read it. But
How much is New York City a character? Yeah, the fifth lady.
Taking place in LA, San Francisco, or I don't know, anywhere else.
It's weird. I don't think of it. It sounds really silly, and sort of belies like a potential lack of control as a writer, at least as a writer of fiction, to say what I'm going to say, which is that I don't think of it as a New York book. It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing to say. I know that. I can tell from the reviews, from the response, from how it's packaged, from who reads it. It's not unclear, but it's just my home. I've lived there for 23 years. I grew up just outside the city, and it just feels like how people interact. And I think part of the reason that people end up writing so much about New York, who are from New York, is because it feels like surely it must apply to everybody. It doesn't feel insidery, because part of the charm of it is that it feels like it's a amazing crash course in how to relate to any kind of person and how to relate to everybody. So how could something that comes from this environment not be relatable to everybody? And so when I'm writing it, it's just, I just know it's where it takes place. I mean, I will say that this is probably, there's a specificity to the area this takes place. So this synagogue, the building itself is on the Lower East Side, and the entire thing works through proximity, sort of, and a little bit of cultish behavior. And so it has to, those streets are very specific. Like it really does take place pretty much just in Chinatown and on the Lower East Side. But also on the cult note, I should say that like the title, I have been getting some questions at readings where people are like, oh, like, did you do a lot of research into cults? And if you are interested in the Nexium universe, you should not buy this book. This is not the book for you. It's, I mostly borrowed like the humor language of like the pamphlets and stuff like that for cults. You're welcome. Okay, one more. This is really fun. It's fun for me. Hi.
This is only sort of,
Okay.
one thing that I enjoyed about one of your books and essays that I read, it based on this reading, I think one thing I'll enjoy about this book is almost the sense of like observing things in life that are surreal, kind of by their nature. Like in the essays, there's like, this is so weird that this happens, and you're like describing it, and that's like kind of an engine for the essay. And I wonder if being on book tour again after these couple years is like a big version of surrealness as well. Like I can't imagine what that, like it's like Back to the Future. Does it feel like Back to the Future? Like what's it like to be on book tour?
I'm like, I just all the Back to the Future, like the flux capacitor is just like in my brain. By the way, if I don't repeat the question, what I just said is going to sound crazy. So the lovely question, very considerate question, if I may, is what's it like to be on book tour? And part of what drew you to my writing in the past has been the sort of observation of the surreal. And is it weird? It is weird, but it feels in a little way like, when people started taking off their masks right away on airplanes, or maybe, I don't know what it was like in San Francisco, but like where suddenly it's not like COVID ended one day and, we all came out like, mole people, like squinting at the sunshine and just like reaching, around, like grasping mothers at you, and it was like not something that we didn't all experience the same pandemic, and we certainly did not experience it simultaneously. And so I think I haven't had that feeling in a while of feeling like, oh, this feels like I'm pretending that the pandemic never happened. So the book tour itself is amazing. And like going to get to see the cities that I love, getting to see the people I love, getting to read to people that I don't love you because I just met you, but that I like. You know what I mean? Like all of that, and getting to actually talk about something the same fundamental things that were true, forever ago. But it's strange to also see, I've been so focused, I think, on how New York has changed and like how it has or has not gotten back on its feet, that, checking into my hotel in downtown Seattle and seeing like the massive amount of tent cities and the massive amount of homeless or people who are not being taken care of by their respective cities or governments. And I know that's long been a problem in San Francisco too. And I haven't really seen it yet today because I'm just in and out, but like the honest answer to your question is like really seeing, I was telling my friend Eli here before that another analogy that's actually also good for the book is Groundhog Day, right? You have this sort of intervention, again, sort of mystical thing. But there's a part where he has the great date with Andy McDowell and he tries to recreate it and he like nails her in the face with a snowball. And so it's mostly wonderful, but every once in a while I'm like, is this real? So it's very exciting though to be able to do it. Like it's like it's something that I thought was sort of lost. and that I really, really missed. I miss seeing all of your legs. It's so nice. You have such a beautiful lower, you're not just torsos. You're people too. It's just like, no, it's just like so it's like genuinely wonderful, but it is honestly a little weird to see how some of the cities are still like getting back on their feet. I don't know if you guys feel that too. I mean, how many of you, is this your first, have you been to in-person readings? What's been going on? No, you have been to a couple. You have a few here. Yeah. Okay, good. I mean, so they're coming back, which is great. And so I'm definitely happy to be a part of that and reach. But I'm okay. I won't torture you anymore, even though I really enjoy doing it with the questions. I might just start asking you about, where are you from? Is it your wife? Okay. I'm gonna sign books. I hope you guys will get a book signed, and thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And that's it. Thank you.